At 12:13 a.m., my phone vibrated in the darkness. It was my son, an FBI agent, calling with a trembling voice. "Dad, turn off all the lights, get to the attic and lock the door immediately. Absolutely, don't let your daughter and her husband know." I knew something terrible had happened, so I followed my son's words without a moment's hesitation. Through a crack in the attic floor, I silently watched, and what I saw destroyed everything I once knew about my family. I'm incredibly grateful you're here with me today. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Your engagement means the world. Also, a quick note. This story weaves together fictional elements for educational and storytelling purposes. Any similarities to actual names or places are unintentional, but the lessons shared here carry significant value. Now let's begin. My name is Walter Reynolds. I'm 67 years old, and I've spent 42 years restoring damaged paintings in the Hillcrest neighborhood of Willowdale. When people bring me their broken art, their torn canvases and faded masterpieces, they trust me to bring them back to life. Piece by piece, brushstroke by brushstroke, I rebuild what time and carelessness have destroyed. It's patient work, delicate work, the kind of work that teaches you to see what others miss, to notice the small details that don't quite fit. I never thought I'd need those skills to save my own life. I live in a Victorian house on Maple Street, the kind with high ceilings and crown molding that my wife Helen always loved. She used to say the morning light through the east windows was perfect for painting. We bought this place 30 years ago when the neighborhood was just starting to turn around. Raised our 2 kids here. Watched the oak trees grow tall enough to shade the whole front yard. 8 months ago, Helen lost her battle with cancer. The house felt too big after that. Too quiet. Too full of memories that hurt to touch. Our daughter Lindsay noticed, of course. She'd always been perceptive, even as a little girl. She'd watch me from the doorway of my studio, those big eyes taking everything in. 6 months ago, Lindsay showed up with her husband Cameron and a proposition. We were sitting in my kitchen, the autumn sun slanting through those east windows Helen had loved so much. Lindsay reached across the table and took my hand. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone in this big house," she said, her voice soft with concern. "Cameron and I have been talking. Our lease is ending anyway. What if we moved in with you just for a while? We could help out, keep you company. You're not getting any younger." I should have paid attention to that last part. You're not getting any younger. But I was lonely, and she was my daughter, and the thought of having family around again felt like a lifeline. Cameron smiled his practiced smile and added, "We'd take care of everything, Walter. Yard work, maintenance, whatever you need. You've worked hard your whole life. Time to take it easy." So I said yes. They moved in the following week. At first it felt good having people in the house again. Lindsay would make dinner. Cameron would handle the bills that had been piling up. They were attentive, almost too attentive. Every time I turned around, one of them was there asking if I needed anything, if I was feeling all right, if I'd taken my vitamins. The vitamins, that's where it started, though I didn't realize it then. Lindsay brought them to me the first night, a small white pill in her palm. "The doctor prescribed these for you, Dad. They'll help with your memory, keep you sharp." I didn't remember going to any doctor, didn't remember any prescription, but Lindsay seemed so certain, so caring, that I swallowed it down with a glass of water. Every night after that, she'd bring me another pill. Sometimes Cameron would bring it instead, always with that same reassuring smile. "Doctor's orders," he'd say. "These will help." But I didn't feel helped. I felt foggy. My thoughts moved like honey, slow and thick. I'd walk into my studio and forget why I'd gone there. I'd start a sentence and lose the words halfway through. Paintings I'd been working on for years suddenly looked unfamiliar, like someone else had put brush to canvas. The confusion scared me more than I wanted to admit. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was getting old, losing my edge. Maybe I needed help. Then came the hallucinations. One night, I woke to use the bathroom. The house was dark and quiet. I shuffled down the hallway, still half asleep, when I saw her. Helen, standing in the corner of our bedroom, wearing the blue dress she'd been buried in. She was looking at me with those sad eyes, not speaking, just watching. My heart nearly stopped. I blinked hard, squeezed my eyes shut, and opened them again. She was still there. I could see the fabric of her dress moving slightly, as if in a breeze I couldn't feel. "Helen." My voice came out as a whisper. She didn't answer, didn't move. Just stood there watching me with that terrible sadness. I must have made some sound, because suddenly Lindsay was there, her hand on my arm. "Dad, are you okay? What's wrong?" When I looked back at the corner, Helen was gone. I couldn't finish. "How do you tell your daughter you're seeing her dead mother?" Lindsay guided me back to bed, her face arranged in concern. "It's okay, Dad. You were dreaming. The mind plays tricks sometimes, especially at night. That's why you need your rest and your vitamins." She tucked me in like I was a child, like I was helpless. The next morning, I felt like I was moving through water. Everything seemed distant, unreal. I went down to the kitchen, needing coffee, needing something to clear the fog in my head. Lindsay and Cameron had already left for work. The house was empty again. I was looking for the coffee filters when I knocked over a stack of papers on the counter. They scattered across the tile floor. I knelt down to gather them up, my knees protesting the movement, when one particular page caught my eye. It was a form. Official-looking, with the letterhead of some medical facility I'd never heard of. Evergreen Behavioral Center. But that wasn't what made my hands start to shake. It was my name at the top. Walter Reynolds. Age 67. And below that, a series of checkboxes. Delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, memory loss, inability to care for self, danger to self or others. None of the boxes were checked yet. The form was blank, waiting, but it was already filled out with my personal information. My date of birth, my address, even my social security number. Someone had prepared this. Someone was planning to have me evaluated, to have me declared incompetent. I stood there in my kitchen, the morning light streaming through Helen's favorite windows, holding that form in my trembling hands. The coffee pot gurgled behind me, mundane and ordinary, while my whole world tilted on its axis. The next morning I found something that made my blood run cold. A psychiatric evaluation form, with my name on it. I wasn't always this suspicious of my own daughter. There was a time when Lindsay was the light of my life, when her laughter filled this house like music. I can still see her at 8 years old, perched on the tall stool in my studio, watching me work on a damaged oil painting. Some kid had donated it to a school fundraiser, a 19th century portrait with a tear right through the subject's face. Most people would have thrown it away, but Lindsay understood that broken things could be beautiful again. She handed me tools with the seriousness of a surgeon's assistant. When I finally blended the last stroke to hide that terrible tear, she clapped her hands together. "Daddy, why do you fix broken paintings?" She asked, her eyes wide with that child's curiosity that sees magic in everything. I set down my brush and pulled her onto my lap. "Because everything deserves a second chance, sweetheart. Even broken things can be beautiful again, if someone cares enough to try." She hugged me tight. "You're the best daddy in the whole world." I believed her. God help me, I believed her. That was a long time ago. My little girl grew up, went to college, started her own life. She'd visit for holidays, call on Sundays, send photos of her adventures. Helen and I would look at those pictures together, proud of the woman she'd become. 2 years back, Lindsay called with exciting news. She'd met someone. His name was Cameron Drake, and from the way she talked about him, you'd think he'd hung the moon. He was charming, she said, successful, a consultant in real estate investment. He had smooth answers for everything and a smile that could sell ice in winter. They married the following summer, in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. Cameron looked the part of the perfect son-in-law in his expensive suit. He shook my hand afterward, his grip firm and confident. "I'll take good care of her, Walter," he promised. "She's everything to me." I wanted to believe him. He was attentive to Lindsay, polite to us, always ready with a compliment. But looking back now, I can see the calculation behind every gesture. The way he'd steer conversations toward money, toward the value of our house, toward my retirement accounts. How he'd mention that healthcare costs were skyrocketing for people our age. How he'd suggest that Helen and I should think about planning for the future. But I was blind to it then. I just saw my daughter happy, and that was enough. 8 months before they moved in, cancer took Helen from me. It happened fast. One day she was complaining about being tired. 6 weeks later, I was standing in a funeral home picking out a casket. The house became a mausoleum. Every room whispered her name. I drifted through those months like a ghost myself. Stopped taking on restoration projects. Let the mail pile up. Blake, my son, called every few days from wherever the FBI had him stationed, his voice tight with worry. But he was too far away to help, and I was too numb to ask. That's when Lindsay started showing up more often. She'd bring groceries, cook meals I barely touched, sit with me in the living room. She was concerned, she said. I looked thinner. Tired. The house was too much for me to handle alone. Then came the day 6 months ago, when she arrived with Cameron, and a proposal I should have questioned. They sat across from me in the living room. Lindsay reached for my hand. "Dad, Cameron and I have been talking. You need family around you. This house is so big and you're here all alone. What if something happened?" Cameron leaned forward, his expression arranged in practiced sympathy. "We'd love to move in, Walter. Just temporarily while you get back on your feet. We could help with everything. The yard, the bills, making sure you're eating. Right, taking your medications." Medications. I wasn't taking any medications, but I was too tired to argue, too lonely to question. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden, Dad," Lindsay said. "You took care of me my whole life. Let me take care of you now." So I said yes. I gave them keys to my house, my sanctuary, my home. They moved in on a Saturday morning in March. That first week, I actually felt grateful. The house had sound and motion again. Someone to talk to over morning coffee. But small things started changing. Cameron offered to help organize my bills. Before I knew it, he was writing checks from my account, managing my finances, to take the stress off. Lindsay started going through my medications, bringing me pills in the morning, pills at night, always with that same concerned smile. And I started feeling different, foggy, disconnected, like my own thoughts were moving through mud. Within weeks, Cameron started installing security cameras. He did it methodically, room by room, always with a reasonable explanation. The front door camera was for package theft. The living room camera was in case I fell. The hallway camera could monitor if I was wandering at night. "For your safety," he'd say, mounting another small black eye to watch my every move. "At your age, we can't be too careful." I watched him drill holes in Helen's carefully painted walls and told myself it was thoughtful, that they cared. I didn't realize they were watching me in my own home. It took me a few days to realize just how many cameras Cameron had installed, slowly, methodically, like a net tightening around me. The first one I'd noticed was in the living room, mounted high in the corner near the crown molding. Cameron had pointed it out casually one afternoon. "Just a precaution, Dad," he'd said. "You know, in case anything happens." At the time, I'd nodded. It seemed reasonable. I was 67 after all, and Helen was gone. Maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to have a little extra security. But then I found another in the hallway, and another in the kitchen angled toward the stove, and one more in the upstairs bathroom tucked behind the mirror's edge where I almost didn't see it. That one made my stomach turn. I stood there for a long moment staring at the tiny black lens, feeling something cold settle in my chest. When I finally asked Cameron about it, he was ready with an answer. "Dad, at your age, what if you fall? What if you have a dizzy spell in the shower? We need to be able to help you." His tone was patient, almost patronizing the way you'd talk to a child. I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat tangled up with the fog that had been clouding my mind for weeks. So I said nothing. It wasn't until later that evening that I realized something else. There were no cameras in their bedroom. None in Lindsay's private bathroom either. I'd walked past their door on my way to the attic studio and glanced in just for a second and seen nothing. No blinking red lights, no lenses watching from the corners. I stood at the foot of the attic stairs and let that sink in. They were watching me everywhere, except in the two places they controlled their own space and mine. When I asked Cameron about it the next morning, he didn't miss a beat. "The attic, Dad. You've got all those chemicals up there, turpentine, varnish, all that restoration stuff. The fumes would wreck the cameras in a week." He clapped me on the shoulder, his grip just a little too firm. "Besides, you're safe up there. You're doing what you love. We don't need to worry about you when you're painting." I nodded again. I always seem to be nodding these days. But something about his answer didn't sit right. I'd been restoring art for 42 years, and I knew damn well that the ventilation system Helen and I had installed kept the fumes under control. There were cameras designed for harsher environments than my studio. But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled and went back to my coffee. That same afternoon, I tried calling an old friend, George Mercer, a fellow restorer I'd known since the 80s. But when I picked up my phone, Cameron was there in an instant, his hand outstretched. "Who are you calling, Dad?" "George, just checking in." Cameron's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know George hasn't called in a while, has he? Maybe he's busy. Why don't you rest instead?" Before I could answer, he took the phone from my hand. Not roughly, just firmly enough that I didn't fight him. He set it on the counter face down. "I'll make sure to remind you to call him later," he said. But later never came. It happened again 2 days after that. This time it was my son, Blake. I saw his name light up the screen, Blake Reynolds, FBI, and my heart leapt. I hadn't spoken to him in over a week, which was unusual. Blake called every Sunday like clockwork. I reached for the phone, but Cameron was faster. He snatched it off the table, his thumb swiping to decline the call. "Dad, you're supposed to be resting. Blake's probably just checking in. I'll text him later and let him know you're fine. I want to talk to him," I said, and I hated how weak my voice sounded. Cameron's expression softened into something that might have been sympathy. "Dad, Blake's busy. He's out there saving the world, dealing with criminals and terrorists. The last thing he needs is to worry about you. Let him do his job. We've got you covered here." I wanted to grab the phone back. I wanted to shout that Blake was my son, that I had every right to talk to him. But the fog was there again, pressing down on my thoughts, making everything feel too heavy to lift. So I just sat there silent, while Cameron slipped my phone into his pocket. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the cameras, about the phone calls that never went through, about the stack of papers he'd been asking me to sign, insurance forms, he said, and updated estate documents, just routine stuff. But I'd been too foggy to read them carefully, and now I couldn't remember half of what I'd put my name on. The next morning, I found one of those forms on Cameron's desk. I wasn't snooping, I'd just been looking for a pen. I picked it up, squinting at the fine print. My signature was at the bottom, clear as day, but I didn't recognize the document. Something about account access. Something about power of attorney. My hands started to shake. I set the paper down carefully, exactly where I'd found it, and backed out of the room. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know what that paper meant, not yet, but I knew it wasn't good. That night, Lindsay brought me my vitamin. She always did it herself, never Cameron. She'd smile and hand me the little white pill with a glass of water, and she'd stand there watching until I swallowed. But this time I didn't. I took the pill, placed it on my tongue, and brought the glass to my lips. I let the water wash over it, but I didn't swallow. I kept the pill tucked under my tongue, hidden, while Lindsay watched me with that same patient smile. "Good," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "Sleep well, Dad." When she left, I spat the pill into my palm. It was small and round and chalky white with no markings. I stared at it for a long time, turning it over between my fingers, wondering what they were really giving me. The pill dissolved in water, turning it a murky gray. Vitamins don't do that. I stood at the sink in my attic studio, watching the chalky residue swirl and settle at the bottom of the glass. I'd taken a real multivitamin from the bottle Helen and I used to share and dropped it into a second glass for comparison. That one fizzed briefly and dissolved clear, leaving only a faint orange tint from the coating. The pill Lindsay had given me last night left something else, entirely a gray sludge that clung to the sides of the glass like sediment. I poured both glasses down the drain and stood there for a long time, gripping the edge of the sink. I thought about Helen, about the night I'd seen her standing in the corner of my bedroom, her face pale and sad. I'd thought I was losing my mind. I'd thought grief had finally broken something inside me that couldn't be fixed. But it wasn't grief. It was the pills. I pulled out the old laptop I kept in the studio and opened a private browser window. My fingers felt clumsy on the keys, but I forced myself to type symptoms of hallucinations, drug-induced confusion, elderly. The results came back in seconds. Hallucinogens, benzodiazepines, sedative hypnotics. A dozen articles about elder abuse, about caretakers using medication to control or incapacitate their victims. I read them all, my chest tightening with every paragraph. The symptoms matched, every single one. I closed the laptop and sat in the dim light of the studio. My life's work surrounded me in half-finished paintings, and now someone, my own daughter, was trying to take it all away. But I needed proof. I needed to know for sure. That afternoon, Lindsay and Cameron left the house to run errands. I heard Cameron's voice in the driveway saying they'd be back in an hour, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted to walk to the mailbox. I waited until I heard the car pull away. Then I moved. Cameron's office was on the first floor, just off the kitchen. He'd taken over what used to be Helen's sewing room. The door was usually locked, but today it wasn't. I stepped inside, my heart hammering in my chest. The desk was neat, organized to the point of obsession. A stack of folders sat in the center, labeled in Cameron's precise handwriting: insurance, estate, medical. I opened the one marked medical first. Inside, I found a glossy brochure for the Evergreen Behavioral Center. The cover showed a serene photograph of a modern building surrounded by trees. Specialized care for cognitive and behavioral health, the tagline read. Private rooms. 24-hour monitoring. A safe, compassionate environment for those who can no longer care for themselves. Beneath the brochure was a draft form, an intake evaluation for psychiatric commitment. My name was already filled in at the top, Walter Reynolds, age 67, and below that a checklist of symptoms, some already marked: hallucinations, delusions, paranoia. The boxes were checked in blue ink. Cameron's handwriting. I stared at the form for a long time, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't a precaution. This wasn't concern. This was a plan. They were going to have me committed. They were going to lock me away in that place, sign papers that said I was incompetent, and take everything I had. The house, the savings, the paintings, all of it. I took a photo of the form with the old phone from my studio and slipped it back into the folder exactly as I'd found it. My hands were steadier now. Anger has a way of clearing the fog. I was back in the living room, pretending to read a newspaper, when the knock came at the door. At first I thought it was Lindsay and Cameron returning early, but the knock was too soft, too hesitant. I opened the door to find Catherine Hayes standing on the porch, a ceramic dish covered in foil in her hands. Catherine was a fixture of the neighborhood, 65, silver-haired, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She and Helen had been friends. I hadn't seen much of her since the funeral. "Walter," she said, her voice warm but cautious, "I brought you some casserole." She paused, her gaze sweeping over me. Her expression shifted. "Are you all right?" I opened my mouth to say yes the way I always did. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she was looking at me, not with pity, but with the sharp, clinical assessment of someone who'd spent 3 decades as a nurse. Catherine stepped inside, setting the casserole on the hall table. She lowered her voice. "Walter, I've been a nurse for 30 years. I know medication issues when I see them. You don't look well." I glanced toward the stairs, toward the cameras I knew were watching. But Catherine had already noticed. Her eyes flicked to the corner of the living room, to the small black lens mounted near the ceiling, and her mouth pressed into a thin line. Before I could answer, I heard the front door open. Lindsay's voice rang out bright and false. She appeared in the hallway a moment later, her smile freezing when she saw Catherine. "Mrs. Hayes, how nice of you to stop by. But Dad really needs to rest." "Don't you, Dad?" Catherine didn't move. I appreciate your concern," Lindsay said, stepping between us. "But we have everything under control. Cameron and I are taking excellent care of him." Catherine's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought she might argue, but then she picked up her empty dish and turned toward the door. As she passed me, she leaned in close. Her voice barely a whisper. "If you need me, I'm 2 houses down." And then she was gone. Lindsay closed the door and turned to me, her smile sharp. "Dad, don't bother the neighbors with your episodes. People might get the wrong idea." I nodded. I always seemed to be nodding, but inside, something had shifted. Catherine had seen. She knew, and more importantly, she'd offered to help. That night, after Lindsay brought me my vitamin, and I tucked it under my tongue again, I lay in bed and thought about Blake. My son, the FBI agent, the one who'd always been a little too cautious about security and worst-case scenarios. 6 months ago, he'd visited for Thanksgiving. He'd pulled me aside in the kitchen and pressed something small and rectangular into my hand. "It's a backup phone, Dad," he'd said quietly. "Prepaid, no contract, no tracking. Keep it charged and hidden somewhere safe, just in case." At the time, I'd thought he was overreacting. I'd humored him, tucked the phone into an old paint supply box in the attic, and forgotten about it, until now. I needed help. I needed evidence. And I needed to do it without them knowing. The alarm clock on the nightstand read 12:13 a.m. when the backup phone buzzed. I shot upright in bed, my heart hammering. I crossed the dark room to the old oak wardrobe felt along the top shelf and pulled down the paint supply box Blake had helped me pack last Thanksgiving. Beneath a stack of unused brushes wrapped in a paint-stained rag was the phone. The screen glowed Blake Reynolds. I answered on the second ring, my voice barely a whisper. "Blake, Dad." His voice was low, urgent, clipped in the way it got when he was working a case. "Listen carefully. You're in danger." My throat tightened. "Blake, something's happening. They've been giving me pills. I've been seeing things, hallucinating." "I know." His voice was hard. "Dad, I've been investigating Cameron for 3 months. He's not who he says he is." The room seemed to tilt. "What do you mean?" "He's a con artist, a professional. Real name is Kevin Drake, or it was last time he got arrested. Before that, he was Marcus Sullivan. 3 priors under different aliases, all targeting elderly people with money. He marries into families, isolates the victim, and takes everything." I sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone pressed hard against my ear. Cameron's not even his real name. No. And Lindsay, I don't know if she's part of it or if he manipulated her too. But they're planning something soon. Very soon. There's a psychiatric facility, I said, my voice breaking. Evergreen Behavioral Center. They have an intake form with my name on it. Blake swore under his breath. That's the play. They commit you, have you declared incompetent, and take control of your assets. Once you're in a place like that, getting you out is nearly impossible. Blake, you have to. I stopped. Why haven't you arrested him? There was a long silence. Conflict of interest. You're my father. My supervisor made it very clear I can't be the agent of record on this case. If I push it, the whole investigation gets thrown out on a technicality, and Cameron walks. I'm working with a colleague, Agent Sarah Mitchell, but she needs time to build a clean case. We're talking 2 weeks minimum to get a warrant. 2 weeks. It felt like an eternity. Dad, I need you to do exactly what I'm about to tell you. Blake's voice sharpened, became the voice of an FBI agent giving orders. Do you have a place in the house where they don't have cameras? The attic, my studio. Cameron said the fumes would damage the equipment. Good. That's your safe zone. Stay there as much as you can without making them suspicious. Watch them. Listen. If you can record anything, do it. But don't let them know you're on to them. And Dad, whatever happens, do not let them take you to Evergreen. Once you're inside, I can't help you. Do you understand? I understand. I need you to be strong. 2 weeks. Can you do that? I thought about the pills, the cameras, the forms with my name on them. The life Helen and I had built now being stripped away piece by piece. I said. I have to go, he said quickly. Keep this phone charged and hidden. I'll call when I can. And Dad, I'm going to fix this, I promise. The line went dead. I sat in the dark for a long moment. Then I moved. I checked every lock, turned off every light in the house, even the porch lamp that Helen used to leave on all night. Then I climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, the old wooden steps creaking under my weight. The studio smelled like turpentine and linseed oil, familiar and grounding. I pulled a chair to the small dormer window that overlooked the driveway and sat down to wait. At first I thought Blake was being paranoid, but then I remembered Cameron thought I was drugged. He thought I was confused, compliant, halfway to the psychiatric ward already. He didn't know I'd stopped taking the pills. At 1:30 a.m., I saw them. 2 vehicles moving slowly down the quiet street with their headlights off. A black SUV and a gray sedan, both with plates I couldn't make out. They rolled into the driveway and stopped, engines idling softly. 3 men got out. All of them were tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing that blended into the night. They didn't speak. They moved with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, and then Cameron appeared. He opened the front door from the inside, gestured them in. No words. Just a quick nod, and they disappeared into the house below me. I pressed myself against the window frame, barely breathing. From my vantage point in the attic, I could see into the first-floor study through the gap in the curtains. The men moved through the room with flashlights, their beams cutting sharp lines through the darkness. They went straight to the old filing cabinet where I kept my personal documents. One of them knelt and pulled out the small safe I'd bolted to the bottom shelf, the one that held Helen's jewelry, our property deeds, and the original copies of our wills. He opened it. Within seconds, the safe was open. They pulled out a large manila envelope and a thick stack of papers. I couldn't see exactly what they were, but I could guess. Deeds, bank statements, insurance policies, everything Cameron would need to take legal control of my life. 30 minutes later, they were gone. The cars rolled back out of the driveway, headlights still off, and vanished into the night. I waited another 10 minutes, then crept downstairs and checked the study. The safe was still open, its contents scattered. The envelope and half the documents were missing. Cameron had locked the front door again and gone back to bed as if nothing had happened. I returned to the attic and sat by the window watching the sky. My hands were still shaking, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was rage, cold, sharp, and clarifying. After they left, I sat in that attic until dawn broke. Watched the sky turn from black to gray to pale blue, thinking, planning. By the time morning came, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I nearly jumped out of my skin when Lindsay's voice called from the bedroom doorway. "Dad, I thought I heard you talking." My hand shot to the phone hidden beneath my pillow, Blake's backup phone, still warm from the call. I forced myself to stay still. The room was dark, the sky outside just beginning to lighten with the first pale hints of dawn. Lindsay stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light. I blinked slowly, as if waking from a deep sleep, and let my head loll to one side. "Helen," I mumbled, slurring the word. "Where did you put the brushes?" Lindsay stepped into the room, her expression sharp. "Dad, were you on the phone?" I blinked again, meeting her eyes with what I hoped was confusion. "Phone." My voice cracked thick with false drowsiness. "No. I was dreaming about your mother." She didn't move. For a long moment, she just stood there watching me. Then her gaze swept the room over the nightstand, where my regular phone sat untouched, over the wardrobe, over the rumpled blankets. I kept my breathing slow and even my face slack. Finally, she sighed. "Okay, Dad. Go back to sleep." But her voice was tight, uncertain. She pulled the door closed, and I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall. I waited, counted to 60. Then I slipped the backup phone from under the pillow, wrapped it in an old shirt, and buried it at the bottom of the wardrobe beneath a stack of sweaters. My hands were shaking. That had been too close. A few hours later, after a tense breakfast, where I palmed Lindsay's vitamin under my tongue and spat it out in the bathroom, I made my announcement. "I think I'll spend the day in the attic," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Need to sort through some old paintings." Lindsay looked up from her coffee, her smile a little too bright. "That's nice, Dad. Just don't overdo it, okay?" Cameron called from the kitchen, his voice cheerful and false. "Yeah, Dad. Take it easy up there." I nodded and climbed the narrow staircase to the attic. The studio smelled the way it always had: linseed oil and turpentine, old wood and dust. Sunlight streamed through the dormer window, cutting bright shafts through the air. This was my sanctuary. Helen and I had converted the attic together 30 years ago. Every corner of this room held a memory. 17 paintings were stored here in various stages of completion. A Hudson River School landscape from the 1870s. A Victorian-era portrait of a young woman in a lace collar. A Baroque still life that I'd been restoring for a museum before Helen got sick. And then there was the portrait of Helen herself. I turned to look at it now, leaning against the far wall. Life-sized, painted in oils 30 years ago when we were newlyweds. She wore a navy blue dress, her hands folded in her lap, holding a single white rose. Her expression was serene, faintly amused, as if she'd been listening to a joke I'd just told. It was the best work I'd ever done. For 15 years, it had hung in the living room above the fireplace, watching over the house. Until 3 weeks ago, when I'd told Lindsay I wanted to bring it up here for cleaning. She'd helped me carry it upstairs, and I'd promised to rehang it soon. I hadn't, and now I was glad. I spent the next hour moving paintings around, pretending to organize, all the while thinking about Blake's instructions. Watch them. Listen. Record anything you can. At one point, I knelt down to shift a canvas and noticed something I'd never paid attention to before: a gap in the floorboards. Not large, maybe half an inch wide, where the old wood had settled and shrunk over the decades. I pressed my face close to the floor and peered through. Below me, I could see straight down into the living room. The angle was perfect. From here, I had a clear view of the sofa, the coffee table, even the front door. I could see Lindsay sitting on the couch, her phone in her hand. A moment later, Cameron walked into view, carrying something: a thick stack of cash bundled with rubber bands. He dropped onto the sofa beside her and started counting it. Hundreds, by the look of them. Lindsay said something I couldn't hear, her face tense, and Cameron laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that carried even through the floorboards. I watched their body language. Cameron grinned, gesturing with the cash. Lindsay shook her head, glanced toward the stairs, bit her lower lip. She looked nervous, afraid even, or maybe guilty. But I couldn't hear them. The floor was too thick, the distance too great. I could see, but I couldn't listen. And without sound, all I had were guesses. I sat back on my heels, frustrated. I need to hear them. I need evidence. Real evidence. I turned back to the workbench, scanning the clutter of tools and supplies. My gaze landed on the small digital camera I used for documentation, photographing paintings before and after restoration. It was old, but functional, with a decent video mode and a built-in microphone. The memory card could hold hours of footage. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The lens was small, unobtrusive. If I could hide it somewhere with a good view of the living room, somewhere they looked at every day, but never really noticed. My eyes drifted back to the portrait of Helen. It hung in the living room for 15 years, right above the fireplace, facing the sofa. The frame was 4 inches wide, solid oak with a hollow space behind the canvas where the backing board sat. There was room in there. Enough room to tuck a small camera into the corner angled just right, and no one would ever suspect. Why would they? It was just a painting. A portrait of my late wife, a fixture of the house, something they saw every day but never truly noticed. The plan started to take shape. I had the camera. I had the location. Now I just needed to figure out how to hide it in plain sight, without them knowing I'd been anywhere near that portrait. Installing a camera in my wife's portrait felt like a betrayal. But Helen would understand. She always did. I sat in the attic studio staring at the small digital camera I'd ordered 2 days ago, a surveillance device no bigger than a coin with a pinhole lens and built-in Wi-Fi. It had arrived at Catherine Hayes's house that afternoon, hidden in a plain brown box. Catherine had knocked on the back door while Lindsay and Cameron were out, slipped the package into my hands, and left without a word. Now the camera sat on my workbench, gleaming under the light. Motion activated. 1080p resolution, night vision, rechargeable battery, good for 7 to 10 days. And most importantly, small enough to hide in plain sight. I thought about Helen's last words to me, spoken in the dim quiet of the hospice room 8 months ago. Her hand had been so light in mine, fragile as paper, but her grip had been firm. "Take care of yourself, Walter," she'd whispered. "Don't let anyone take advantage of your kindness. You're too good, you know that, too trusting." At the time, I'd brushed it off. "Who would take advantage of me, Helen? I'll be fine." She'd smiled, sad and knowing. "Promise me. Promise you'll be careful." "I promise." I hadn't understood then, but I understood now. Helen had seen something in Lindsay. Maybe not the full scope of it, but enough to worry, enough to warn me. And I'd been too grief-stricken, too distracted to notice the signs. I looked at the portrait leaning against the wall, the one I'd painted 30 years ago, when Helen's hair was still dark and her eyes still bright. Her face gazed back at me, serene and steady. "Forgive me, sweetheart," I thought. "I'm using your beautiful face to catch the ugly truth about our daughter. But I know you'd want me to protect myself." I picked up the camera and got to work. The first step was to tell Lindsay I was bringing the portrait back downstairs. I found her in the kitchen that afternoon, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway. "Lindsay," I said, keeping my voice casual, "I'm bringing your mother's portrait back down today. The frame's fixed." She blinked, surprised. "Oh. Dad, you don't have to go to all that trouble." I cut her off, my voice firmer than it had been in weeks. "This is your mother. I painted this. I'm not leaving it damaged." For a moment, she just stared at me. It was the first time I'd pushed back against her in months, the first time I'd refused to be placated or redirected. "Okay, Dad," she said slowly. "Whatever you want." Cameron glanced over from the sink, his expression unreadable. "Need help carrying it down, Dad?" "No," I said. "I can manage." I climbed back upstairs, my heart pounding. The installation took 2 hours. I worked methodically the way I always had when restoring a painting. First, I laid the portrait face down on the workbench. Then, I removed the small tacks holding the backing board in place, gently lifting it away to reveal the hollow space behind the canvas. The stretcher bars created a gap of about 2 inches between the painted surface and the backing. Plenty of room. I studied the back of the canvas, tracing the faint outline of Helen's face through the weave of the fabric. Her eyes. That's where the camera needed to go. Using a precision drill bit, just 2 millimeters wide, I carefully pierced a hole through the canvas from the back, positioning it at the exact center of her left pupil. The drill bit slid through easily, and when I held the canvas up to the light, I could see a pinpoint of brightness where the hole had opened. Her eyes always seemed to follow you around the room, I thought. Now they really would. I mounted the camera on a small strip of double-sided tape, pressing it firmly against the back of the canvas so that the lens aligned perfectly with the pinhole. Then I powered it on and connected my old tablet to the camera's Wi-Fi signal, an independent network that wouldn't show up on Cameron's router. The app loaded slowly, and then the screen flickered to life. I was looking at my own workbench from the camera's perspective. The image was dim light, struggled to pass through such a small opening, but it was clear enough. I tested the microphone by speaking aloud. A moment later, I played back the recording. My voice came through crisp and clear. Perfect. I carefully replaced the backing board, securing it with the tacks, and turned the portrait over. From the front, there was nothing. No sign of the camera, no hint of the tiny lens hidden in the painted pupil. Just Helen's face unchanged, watching the world with the same calm patience she'd always had. I sat down and looked at her. Forgive me, sweetheart," I said quietly. "I'm using your beautiful face to catch the ugly truth about our daughter. But I know you'd want me to protect myself. You always did." In the silence, I felt something, a faint sense of reassurance, as if Helen were standing beside me, her hand on my shoulder. Carrying the portrait downstairs was harder than expected. The frame was solid oak, heavy and unwieldy. I maneuvered it into the living room and lifted it carefully onto the hooks above the fireplace, the same spot it had occupied for 15 years. The angle was perfect. Helen's gaze and the camera's lens looked straight across the room toward the sofa and the coffee table. Anyone sitting there would be directly in view. Lindsay appeared in the doorway a moment later, her arms crossed. She looked at the portrait, then at me. "It looks good, Dad," she said softly. "Mom looks beautiful." "She always was," I replied. She stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked away. She had no idea Helen was watching her now. That evening, I sat in the attic with the tablet in my lap. At 9:47 p.m., the motion sensor activated. Lindsay and Cameron walked into view and sat down on the sofa directly beneath the portrait. And they started talking. I will never forget the first words I heard through that camera. "How much longer until we can move the old man to Evergreen?" I sat in the darkness of the attic, earbuds pressed into my ears, the tablet glowing faintly in my lap. The live feed from Helen's portrait showed Lindsay and Cameron on the sofa below, drinks in hand, relaxed and smiling. They thought they were alone. They thought they were safe. They had no idea Helen was watching. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the tablet. I pressed the record button just in case the motion activation failed and turned up the volume. Cameron stretched his arm across the back of the sofa, his voice smooth and confident. "The appointment with Russo is next Thursday. He'll declare your dad incompetent." Lindsay took a sip of her wine, her expression thoughtful. "Are you sure he'll sign off on it?" Cameron laughed, a low, easy sound that made my stomach turn. "Babe, I paid him $50,000. By Friday, we'll have the commitment papers. $50,000. For a doctor to lie, to declare me insane, to lock me away." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest, but I forced myself to keep listening. Lindsay set her glass down on the coffee table and leaned back, exhaling slowly. "God, I can't wait to get out of this house. I'm so tired of pretending to care. The words hit me like a fist to the gut. Pretending to care. Every time she'd asked if I was okay. Every time she'd brought me those pills with that gentle, concerned smile. Every time she'd touched my shoulder and said, "We're here for you, Dad." It had all been a lie. Cameron grinned. Think about it, 3.2 million in the bank plus the paintings. Ashford says the collection's worth 1.2 million on the black market. Ashford. I committed the name to memory. An art dealer, apparently. Someone who trafficked in stolen goods. Lindsay laughed, light and musical, the same laugh she'd had as a little girl when I used to swing her around the living room. But now it sounded different. Hollow. Venomous. 4.5 million total, she said, swirling her wine. Not bad for 6 months of playing the devoted daughter. I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. That was my daughter. My little girl. The one who used to sit in my studio and ask me about second chances. The one who'd cried at Helen's funeral and held my hand through the service. Where had she gone? Or had she ever really been there at all? Cameron took a drink and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The drugs, the isolation, everyone in town thinks Walter's losing his mind. Mrs. Hayes almost screwed things up, Lindsay said, her voice edged with irritation. Cameron waved a dismissive hand. No one listens to nosy old women. I thought of Catherine, kind, sharp-eyed Catherine, who'd noticed something was wrong and tried to help. And Cameron dismissed her as a nosy old woman, as if her concern meant nothing. Rage flickered in my chest, hot and bright, cutting through the grief. Lindsay bit her lip, glancing toward the stairs. Do you think Blake suspects anything? Cameron shrugged. He's too busy with the FBI. And conflict of interest means he can't touch us. Even if he wanted to, his hands are tied. He knew. Cameron knew about the FBI regulations, about the restrictions on Blake's investigation. He'd done his homework. This wasn't some impulsive scheme, it was calculated, researched, professional. Blake had been right. Cameron was a con artist, and he was good at it. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, but the tears kept coming. Silent. Hot. I couldn't stop them. Then Lindsay's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted just slightly, but enough that I noticed. Something softened in her face. Something private. I need to take this, she said, standing up quickly. Cameron barely looked up. Sure, babe. She walked out of the frame, her voice fading as she moved into the hallway. The camera's microphone still picked up her words, muffled and distant, but audible. Hey. Yeah, everything's on track. Next week? I know. I love you too. I froze. I love you too. Her voice had changed. It wasn't the cool, calculating tone she used with Cameron. It was warm, intimate, tender. She came back into the living room a moment later, slipping her phone into her pocket. Cameron looked up from his drink. Your mom? Lindsay didn't hesitate. Yeah, she was just checking in. Cameron nodded and took another sip, completely unbothered. But I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding, my mind racing. Liar. Lindsay's mother, my wife, had been dead for 8 months. So who the hell had she just told she loved? I watched the rest of the recording in silence. Lindsay and Cameron finished their drinks, talked briefly about logistics, moving expenses, travel plans, something about a rental property in Florida, and then went to bed. By the time the feed went dark, it was past midnight. I sat in the attic for a long time after that, staring at the frozen image on the tablet screen. Lindsay's face caught mid-laugh, her eyes bright with satisfaction. I saved the recording. Every word, every laugh, every moment of betrayal. The file uploaded automatically to a cloud account I'd set up under a fake name, one more precaution Blake had taught me years ago, back when I thought he was being paranoid. But that phone call haunted me. I love you too. Who was she saying that to? Because it sure as hell wasn't Cameron sitting right next to her. The next morning, Catherine Hayes was standing on my doorstep. And she wasn't leaving without answers. I saw her through the front window before she knocked, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture rigid with determination. Lindsay and Cameron had left half an hour earlier, something about errands and appointments, and I'd been alone in the house reviewing last night's recording for the third time. When the knock came, I hesitated. But then I remembered the way Catherine had stood up to Cameron, the way she'd called elder abuse by its name, and I opened the door. "Walter," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. My sister died in a place like Evergreen." I recognized the pattern. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the attic, the safest place in the house. Catherine didn't ask why I led her there. She just followed, her sharp eyes taking in the paintings, the workbench, the small tablet I'd left sitting by the window. "Your sister?" I asked quietly. Catherine nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Sarah, my younger sister. 10 years ago, her daughter-in-law had her committed to a facility just like Evergreen. Said Sarah was delusional, a danger to herself. Within 6 months, Sarah was dead. And by the time I found out what was really happening, it was too late." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw the weight of a decade's guilt settle across her shoulders. "I didn't fight hard enough for her," Catherine said. "I let them convince me she was sick, that the family knew best. I won't make that mistake again." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd barely known me before Helen died, who had no reason to get involved in my mess. And I made a decision. "I know," I said. "I know what they're planning." I showed her the tablet, played her a snippet of last night's recording, just enough. Cameron's voice, smooth and confident, 3.2 million in the bank. Lindsay's laugh. "Not bad for 6 months of playing the devoted daughter." Catherine's face went pale, then red with fury. "I called your son," she said, her voice shaking. "Blake. I found his number in the FBI directory, and I called him 2 days ago. Told him what I've been seeing, the pills, the isolation, the way they watch you. He said he's working on it, but he needs time. He said my testimony would be crucial because I'm an independent witness, not family." "Thank you," I whispered. Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. "I've been keeping a log. Dates, times, things I've observed. Lindsay intercepting your mail. Cameron blocking visitors. The way you've looked confused, unsteady since they moved in." She set the notebook on the workbench. "This is yours now. Use it however you need to." Then she pressed a key into my hand, a small brass key on a plain ring. "My house. 2 doors down. If you need to get out, my door is always open." I stared at the key, my throat tight. "Catherine, don't thank me," she said firmly. "Just promise me you'll fight. Promise me you won't let them win. I promise." We were coming down the attic stairs when I heard the front door open. Catherine and I froze. I glanced at her, saw the flicker of alarm in her eyes, but she straightened her shoulders and kept walking. Cameron appeared in the hallway, his expression unreadable. His gaze flicked from Catherine to me, then back to Catherine. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice cool and measured. "I didn't realize we were expecting company." "I brought Walter a casserole," Catherine said smoothly. "Just checking in." Cameron's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's very kind. But Walter's family is taking care of him. He doesn't need outside interference." Catherine's jaw tightened. "I'm not interfering. I'm concerned." "Your concern is noted," Cameron said, stepping closer. "But Walter's situation is a private family matter." "Elder abuse is not a private family matter," Catherine said, her voice hard. "It's a crime." The air in the hallway seemed to freeze. Cameron's smile vanished. For a moment, he just stared at her, his eyes cold and sharp. "Be careful with accusations, Mrs. Hayes," he said softly. "Slander is also a crime." Catherine didn't blink. "So is poisoning someone without their consent." Cameron went very still. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing his options, deciding how to respond. Finally, he smiled again, but it was a thin, dangerous thing. I think it's time for you to leave, Mrs. Hayes. Catherine turned to me, her expression softening. Walter, you have my number. Call me any time. Then she walked past Cameron, her head held high, and left. Cameron closed the door behind her and turned to me, his face tight with controlled anger. Walter, he said, his voice low. I don't want that woman in this house again. She's filling your head with paranoid nonsense. I blinked at him, forcing my expression into confusion. What, Catherine, she was just being kind. Cameron exhaled slowly, visibly forcing himself to calm down. Dad, I know you're confused, but Mrs. Hayes doesn't understand your condition. She's making things worse. Please just, stay away from her, okay? I nodded, letting my shoulders slump. Okay. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded and walked away. He thinks I'm still drugged, I thought. Still compliant. He has no idea I've been recording every word. That night, I sat in the attic with the tablet waiting. At 9:30 p.m., Lindsay and Cameron appeared on the screen, settling onto the sofa. Lindsay's face was tight with tension. Catherine Hayes is a problem, she said without preamble. Cameron rubbed his temples. I took care of it. Sent her packing. That's not enough! Lindsay's voice was sharp. She called Blake. We need to move faster. Cameron looked up. How much faster? Lindsay was silent for a moment, thinking. Then her expression hardened. Russo's evaluation is Thursday. But what if we get Dad to Evergreen this Saturday emergency commitment? We say he attacked me. Cameron blinked. Can we do that? Russo owes us. He'll backdate the paperwork. We just need to stage an incident. I'll have a bruise, maybe a scratch. Enough to justify emergency commitment. What if Blake finds out? Lindsay's smile was cold. By the time Blake gets his warrant, Dad will be locked in Evergreen, declared incompetent, and will have power of attorney. Game over. And once he's in there, it's nearly impossible to get him out. You know how these places work. Cameron nodded slowly. Okay, Saturday. I'll back you up. We'll say he's been getting violent, aggressive. The drugs made him paranoid. Perfect. Call Russo in the morning. Tell him we need the papers ready by Saturday noon. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking. Saturday, not next Thursday, not in 8 days, in 2 days. Blake had said he needed 2 weeks to get a warrant. But Lindsay and Cameron were moving the timeline up. They were going to lock me away in 48 hours, and there was nothing Blake could do to stop it in time. 2 days. I had 2 days to gather enough evidence, pull Blake in, and stop them from taking me to Evergreen. And I still didn't know who Lindsay was really working with. I spent that entire day researching Evergreen Behavioral Center. What I found made my blood run cold. I sat in the attic with my old laptop balanced on my knees, connected to the internet, through a mobile hotspot from Blake's backup phone. I couldn't risk using the house Wi-Fi. Cameron would see the search history. Evergreen's website looked professional, almost too professional. Glossy photographs of serene courtyards and smiling staff members. Testimonials from grateful families. An award badge proclaiming them Best Mental Health Facility 2022. But when I dug deeper, the veneer started to crack. I searched Evergreen Behavioral Center complaints. Then Evergreen Behavioral Center lawsuit. The results came slowly, buried beneath layers of search engine optimization. But they were there. 3 lawsuits in the past 5 years. All settled out of court. All sealed with non-disclosure agreements. Just vague references to allegations of wrongful confinement and financial disputes. One article caught my eye, a short piece from a local news site published 2 years ago. The headline read, "Family Questions Mental Health Facility After Mother's Passing." The article mentioned a man named Robert Klein, 58, whose mother Margaret had died after 6 months at Evergreen. Robert had tried to sue, but the case had been settled quietly. Reading between the lines, it was clear Robert hadn't gotten justice. Just money. Hush money. I kept searching. Robert Klein's name led me to a Facebook group, Families Against Elder Abuse. I found his profile, sent him a private message, and waited. He replied 30 minutes later with a phone number. My hands were shaking when I dialed. Hello. Robert's voice was wary, tired. Mr. Klein, my name is Walter Reynolds. I think my family is trying to get me into Evergreen. I saw your mother's case. There was a long silence. Then a bitter, exhausted laugh. Evergreen. God. His voice dropped. Mr. Reynolds, don't let them take you there. I'm trying not to, I said. But I need to know what I'm up against. Robert exhaled slowly. My mother was sharp as a tack at 68. Then my sister said Mom was declining. Said she needed professional care. Got a doctor to sign commitment papers. Dr. Gerald Russo. I gripped the phone tighter. Russo, Dr. Gerald Russo. Sahantashe mukatikakam. Spanomon. You know him too. Robert's voice turned hard. He's part of the racket. He signs off on anyone Evergreen wants. Within 2 months at Evergreen, my mother actually was confused. They had her so drugged up she couldn't remember her own name. She had $2 million in savings, Mr. Reynolds. By the time I finally got her out, there was $40,000 left. $40,000, I repeated, stunned. Evergreen charges $15,000 a week. Over 6 months, that's $360,000. Where did the rest go? His voice cracked. I found wire transfers to shell accounts, payments to consultants and legal fees I never authorized. By the time I got access to her records, it was too late. And 3 months after I brought her home, she died. Heart failure, but I know it was the drugs. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. Wait, don't be sorry. Fight. Robert's voice steadied. And if you build a case, if you can get them into a courtroom, I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. I kept digging. Another search, Evergreen Behavioral Center survivors. I found a blog post from a year ago. The headline, Woman Escapes Mental Health Facility Alleges Financial Abuse. The woman's name was Margaret Lawson, 71. I tracked down her contact information through the blog's author and called her that afternoon. Hello. Her voice was thin, fragile. Mrs. Lawson, my name is Walter Reynolds. I read about your experience at Evergreen. I think my family is trying to do the same thing to me. There was a long pause, then a shaky breath. Evergreen. I still have nightmares. Margaret's voice wavered, but she told me. Her grandson Daniel had convinced a judge she had dementia. Dr. Russo again, Russo had signed the paperwork. Within weeks, she was locked inside Evergreen, drugged into compliance, and forced to sign over her house, her savings, her stocks. $1.8 million gone. They made me sign papers while I was so sedated I couldn't even read them, she whispered. I thought I was signing get-well cards, but it was deeds, bank transfers, everything. How did you get out? A nurse, Jennifer Wells. She helped me call a lawyer. The lawyer filed an emergency petition, and after 4 months they let me go. But by then, her voice broke. By then, Daniel had everything. I live on Social Security now in a subsidized apartment. I lost everything. I'm going to stop them, I said quietly. If I can get them in front of a judge, will you testify? Yes. Her voice was barely audible. Yes. I'll tell them what they did to me. I hung up and sat in the silence of the attic, staring at my notes. Robert Klein, Margaret Lawson, 2 victims, nearly $4 million stolen. And those were just the ones I'd found in an afternoon. How many others were there? This wasn't just about me. This was a system, a predatory machine that fed on the elderly, the vulnerable, the isolated. And Dr. Russo was the gatekeeper. I was about to close the laptop when the tablet on the workbench lit up a flicker of movement from the camera feed below. I glanced down and froze. A man I'd never seen before was walking into my living room. He was tall, over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a black suit, a white shirt, no tie. Polished but dangerous. Around 40, maybe. Lindsay appeared from the kitchen, her face lighting up with a smile I hadn't seen her give Cameron in months. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around him, and then she kissed him. Not a polite peck, a real kiss. Long, intimate, full of warmth. I'd been so focused on the phone calls I almost missed it. On the camera feed below, a man I'd never seen before was walking into my living room. Lindsay kissed him. And it wasn't Cameron. Hold on before I uncover the identity of this stranger and expose the mastermind behind it all. Let me know you're still here. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think Lindsay is the real mastermind, or 2 if you believe someone else is pulling the strings. Also note what follows includes fictional components. You're welcome to leave if this isn't for you. Now the truth. The man in my living room was tall, well-dressed in an expensive suit with cold eyes. And my daughter was kissing him like Cameron didn't exist. I sat frozen in the attic, staring at the tablet screen, my heart hammering in my chest. Cameron was at work or wherever he went during the day. Lindsay and the stranger had the house to themselves, and they were using the time. They broke apart after a long moment, and the man settled onto the sofa, pulling Lindsay down beside him. She leaned into him, her hand resting on his knee, her expression soft and affectionate, in a way I hadn't seen her look at Cameron in months, maybe ever. I turned up the volume on the tablet, my hands shaking. "So we're still on schedule?" the man asked. His voice was smooth, confident. "Saturday," Lindsay nodded. "Yes, Russo will backdate the evaluation. Saturday morning, we get Dad to Evergreen. And Cameron," Lindsay laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Cameron thinks we're splitting the money after the Evergreen thing. He has no idea about the offshore accounts you set up." The man grinned. "3.5 million. All transferred within 48 hours of your father's commitment. By the time Cameron figures it out, we'll be in Grand Cayman." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Grand Cayman. Offshore accounts. They weren't just stealing from me, they were planning to disappear. And Cameron, the man I'd thought was the mastermind, didn't even know. Lindsay hesitated, biting her lip. "What if he tries to stop us?" The man, Trevor, I still didn't know his name yet, leaned back, utterly relaxed. "He won't. I've been setting him up for months. The paper trail shows he's the one defrauding your dad. All the documents, all the communications with Russo. Cameron's name is on everything." My stomach turned. Cameron was being framed. He was a patsy, a scapegoat. And when this all came crashing down, he'd be the one holding the bag. Lindsay smiled, leaning in to kiss the man again. "You're brilliant, Trevor." Trevor. Finally, I had a name. "I know," Trevor said, smirking. They shifted on the sofa, settling into a more comfortable position. Trevor draped his arm around Lindsay's shoulders, and they talked like they were planning a vacation, not a crime. "The paintings alone will bring in 1.2 million from Ashford," Trevor said. "I'll handle the sale." Lindsay nodded. "Dad's entire collection. Some of them he restored himself." There was no emotion in her voice. No hesitation. She was talking about my life's work paintings I'd spent years bringing back from ruin like they were furniture she was selling at a garage sale. Trevor shrugged. "Sentimental value doesn't pay for a Caribbean penthouse, babe." Lindsay was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if we're going too far." For a split second, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she still had a conscience. Maybe there was some part of my daughter left inside her. But Trevor's response crushed that hope immediately. "Too far?" His voice turned sharp, almost annoyed. "Lindsay, you came to me 3 years ago. Your exact words, 'My dad is sitting on a pile of money, and I'm drowning in debt.' This was your plan. 3 years. 3 years ago, I gripped the edge of the workbench, my knees buckling. 3 years ago was 2021. A year before Helen died. before Lindsay met Cameron, before any of this started, which meant Lindsay had been planning this before she married Cameron. Cameron wasn't the mastermind. He was just another tool like me, another pawn in Lindsay's game. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect of everything. I know, Lindsay said quietly, her voice cold again. You're right. I pulled out Blake's backup phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I took a screenshot of Trevor's face from the video feed, clear, well-lit, unmistakable. Then I recorded a 30-second clip of their conversation, just enough to capture Trevor's voice saying, "Cameron's name is on everything," and Grand Cayman. I sent both to Blake with a message. Found this. Lindsay has a partner. Name is Trevor. Sending photo. Blake's reply came 5 minutes later. Digging now. Stay safe. I spent the next hour digging through everything I had. Old emails I'd copied from Cameron's office weeks ago. Search results on Victor Ashford. Anything that could help me understand the full scope of what they were planning. Victor Ashford was exactly what I'd suspected, a Manhattan art dealer with a legitimate gallery and an underground reputation. He'd been investigated by the FBI in 2019 for trafficking stolen art, but the case had fallen apart due to lack of evidence. Now he operated in the gray area between legal and illegal brokering deals for wealthy collectors who didn't ask too many questions about provenance. In one of Cameron's old emails, I found a message to Ashford. 17 pieces. 20th century American art. Owner willing to sell. Documentation will be signed and notarized. Let me know your offer. 17 pieces, my entire collection. They were planning to forge my signature on the sales documents after I was committed. Once I was declared incompetent, my signature wouldn't matter anymore. They could sign whatever they wanted, and no one would question it. I felt sick. An hour later, Blake's text came through. Trevor Mason, investment banker. Also on our watch list. Dad, this is bigger than we thought. I'm coming tomorrow morning. Don't let them take you before I get there. A second later, an attachment arrived, a PDF file. I opened it with trembling hands. Trevor Mason, age 39. Investment banker at Crestview Capital, a private equity firm in Manhattan. On FBI watch list since 2022 for suspected money laundering and financial fraud. Not yet charged due to insufficient evidence. There was more. 2 prior relationships with wealthy women, both ending with mysterious financial losses. No charges filed. No evidence strong enough to prosecute. But the pattern was clear. Trevor was a professional con artist, and Lindsay wasn't his victim. She was his willing partner. Blake's text arrived an hour later. Trevor Mason, investment banker. Also on our watch list. Dad, this is bigger than we thought. I'm coming tomorrow morning. Don't let them take you before I get there. Friday morning, Dr. Gerald Russo arrived at my door with a briefcase and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'd been awake since 4, sitting in the attic with the tablet watching the live feed from Helen's portrait. Lindsay and Cameron had spent the night whispering plans I couldn't quite hear through the walls. But I knew what was coming. Russo's evaluation was the final piece. Once he signed the papers, they could take me to Evergreen. I heard the doorbell ring. Heard Lindsay's bright, false voice. Dr. Russo, thank you so much for coming. I made my way downstairs slowly, deliberately. I had to play the part, confused, compliant, harmless. If Russo suspected I knew what he was doing, he might change the plan, and I needed him on camera. Lindsay met me at the bottom of the stairs, her hand on my elbow. Dad, Dr. Russo is here to help you. Just answer his questions honestly, okay? I nodded. Okay. We sat in the living room. Russo in the armchair across from me, Lindsay and Cameron hovering nearby. Above us, Helen's portrait watched in silence. Russo opened his briefcase and pulled out a clipboard. Mr. Reynolds, how are you feeling today? I'm fine, doctor. Your daughter tells me you've been confused lately, Seeing things that aren't there, I kept my expression neutral. I don't know what she means. Russo made a note. He wasn't listening. He was going through the motions, checking boxes on a script he'd already written. What year is it? He asked. Who is the current president? Donald Trump. What day of the week is it? Friday. Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? It's 193, 86, 79, 72. I rattled off the sequence without hesitation. Russo frowned. Clearly he hadn't expected me to be so sharp. But he recovered quickly, flipping to the next page. Do you ever feel like people are watching you? He asked, his tone shifting, leading suggestive. I hesitated. Sometimes. Do you hear voices? I met his eyes. I sometimes hear my wife. But she's been dead for 8 months. Russo wrote quickly, underlining something. Auditory hallucinations. Do you feel safe in this house? I let a faint smile touch my lips. Should I not? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the flicker of suspicion in his expression. He knew I was sharper than Lindsay had told him. But it didn't matter. He'd already been paid. Confusion is natural at your age, Mr. Reynolds, he said, his voice patronizing. I'm not suffering from dementia, doctor. Lindsay stepped forward, her voice sweet and worried. Dad, please. Dr. Russo is just trying to help. I looked at her, my daughter, my little girl, and saw nothing but cold calculation in her eyes. The evaluation ended 20 minutes later. Russo stood, shook my hand with false warmth, and followed Lindsay and Cameron into the kitchen for a private consultation. I went upstairs to the attic, and I listened. The camera feed picked up every word. There are clear signs of paranoid delusions. Russo said, his voice clinical and detached. Possible early-stage dementia. He's a danger to himself. Cameron leaned against the counter. So you'll sign the commitment papers. Already done. Russo opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Backdated to last week. He can be admitted immediately. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. He'd filled out the forms before he'd even met me. The evaluation had been a sham from the start. Lindsay's voice was tense. Tomorrow morning, we'll ambulance at 7 a.m. before he wakes up. It'll be less traumatic before I wake up. Like I was a criminal being hauled off in the middle of the night. Cameron pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to Russo. Your fee. As agreed, Russo took it without hesitation, tucking it into his briefcase. I zoomed in on the tablet screen, catching a glimpse of the cash inside. Thick, bundled bills. $50,000 or close to it. Every second of it was recorded. As soon as Russo left, I pulled out Blake's phone and sent a message. They're coming at 7 a.m. tomorrow. By ambulance. Blake's reply came 5 minutes later. I'll be there at 6 a.m. Don't let them take you. 6 a.m. 1 hour before the ambulance. If Blake was on time, I'd be safe. If he was late, I'd be gone. That evening, I watched Lindsay make another phone call. She stood in the living room, her back to Helen's portrait, her phone pressed to her ear. Now it's done, she said, her voice bright with excitement. Russo signed everything. Tomorrow morning, Dad goes to Evergreen. By noon, the transfers start. Trevor's voice crackled through the speaker, faint but audible. Meet me in Grand Cayman next Friday. Don't forget to leave the note for Cameron. He'll never suspect, Lindsay said, smiling. If he does, his name is on all the documents. He goes to prison, not us. Lindsay laughed, soft and satisfied, and I felt something in me harden into ice. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the attic reviewing every second of footage I'd captured. Russo's fake evaluation, the bribe, Lindsay's phone call with Trevor. I copied everything to 3 USB drives. One I hid in the paint supply box. One I tucked into the inner pocket of my jacket. and the third I slipped into an envelope and carried to Catherine Hayes's house at 2 in the morning. She answered the door in her bathrobe, her face pale with worry. "Walter, keep this safe," I whispered, pressing the envelope into her hands. "If anything happens to me, give it to Blake." She nodded, her grip firm. "I will." By the time I returned to the attic, it was nearly 5 a.m. Blake would arrive in an hour. The ambulance in 2. I just had to hold on. At 5:30 a.m., I heard a car pull up outside. Then another. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop. 2 vehicles sat in the driveway. One was a white van with the words "Private Medical Transport" stenciled on the side. The other was a black sedan, windows tinted. They were early, an hour and a half early, and Blake wasn't here yet. Then I heard it, the sharp, unmistakable sound of breaking glass downstairs. The ambulance was supposed to arrive at 7 o'clock in the morning. But when I glanced at the clock on my tablet, 5:45 a.m., I heard the wail of a siren pulling up in front of my house. They had moved the schedule forward. I sat frozen in the attic for a heartbeat, my pulse hammering in my ears. Below me, I heard the creak of the front door opening, footsteps on hardwood, low, urgent voices. Cameron's voice. "Let's move fast. Get him before he wakes up." Lindsay's reply was soft, chillingly calm. "He's upstairs sleeping. We have time." I looked down at the tablet in my lap. The screen still showed the paused frame from last night's recording, Lindsay kissing Trevor Mason, the man she'd been plotting with all along. My finger hovered over the play button. Then I heard it, the heavy tread of boots on the stairs. They were coming for me. I grabbed the tablet, shoved it under my arm, and stood. My knees protested. I was 67 years old, not a young man anymore, but adrenaline sharpened everything. I stepped quietly to the attic door, cracked it open an inch, and peered down the hallway. 2 men in medical uniforms were at the top of the stairs. One carried a folded stretcher. The other held a clipboard and a syringe. Behind them stood Cameron, his face tight with impatience, and Lindsay, her expression blank and cold. "He's in the bedroom," Cameron said, gesturing. "Get him sedated and on the stretcher. We'll sign the paperwork downstairs." Lindsay added, her voice like ice. "Make it quick. I don't want the neighbors to see." The medics nodded and moved toward my bedroom. I stepped out of the attic doorway. "Looking for me," I said. All 4 of them froze. Cameron's eyes went wide. Lindsay's face drained of color. The 2 medics exchanged a glance, hands twitching toward their pockets. "Dad." Lindsay started, her voice suddenly bright and false. "You're awake, we were just—" "I know exactly what you were doing," I said. My voice was steady even though my heart was racing. I held up the tablet. "And I have proof." Cameron's face twisted. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're confused. That's why we're getting you help. The help." I laughed, a bitter sound. "You mean Evergreen Behavioral Center, the place where elderly people go in with millions and come out in body bags?" Lindsay's mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed. "Dad, you need to calm down." "I recorded everything," I said. I tapped the tablet screen. The video began to play, volume turned up high. Lindsay's voice filled the hallway. "How much longer until we can move the old man to Evergreen?" Cameron's reply. "Russo will sign off. I paid him $50,000. Then Lindsay again. $3.2 million in the bank, plus the paintings. $4.5 million total." The color drained from Cameron's face. One of the medics took a step back. Lindsay stood perfectly still, her jaw clenched. "You drugged me." I continued, my voice rising. "You isolated me. You bribed a psychiatrist to declare me insane. You forged documents. And you plan to steal everything I've worked for my entire life." Cameron lunged forward. "Give me that tablet. Touch it and you'll regret it," I snapped, stepping back. "I've already made copies, 3 of them. One is with my neighbor, Catherine Hayes. One is uploaded to a secure cloud account. And one is with my son Blake. At the mention of Blake's name, Lindsay's composure shattered. You called Blake. Her voice was shrill, now panicked. I didn't have to, I said. He's been investigating you for months. Cameron turned on Lindsay. You said Blake wouldn't be a problem. You said he was too busy with the FBI to care. He was, Lindsay shot back. Until your greed made us move too fast. The two medics edged toward the stairs. We're not part of this, one of them muttered. We were just hired to... Not hired by who? I demanded. The medic hesitated, then pointed at Cameron. Him. He paid us $5,000 to show up early and pick you up before... A sharp voice cut through the chaos from the front door below. Freeze. This is the FBI. All of us turned. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Blake appeared, first badge in hand, his face hard and cold. Behind him was a woman in a dark suit, Agent Sarah Mitchell, according to the ID clipped to her belt. Two uniformed police officers followed. Blake's eyes swept the scene, me clutching the tablet. Lindsay and Cameron, faces pale and frozen. The two fake medics, hands raised. Let everyone stays exactly where they are, Blake said. His voice was calm, controlled, but there was steel beneath it. He looked at me. Dad, are you all right? I nodded. I'm fine, but they're not. Blake turned to Lindsay. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, pain maybe, or disbelief. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold professionalism of a federal agent. Lindsay Reynolds, he said. Cameron Drake, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted kidnapping. This is insane, Lindsay shrieked. He's the one who's losing his mind. We were trying to help him. Blake ignored her. He nodded to Agent Mitchell, who stepped forward with handcuffs. The two fake medics were cuffed as well, one of them protesting weakly that he didn't know it was illegal. Cameron tried one last desperate move. Blake, listen to me. Your father is sick. He's been hallucinating. We have a doctor's report. From Dr. Gerald Russo, Blake said coolly. The psychiatrist you paid $50,000 to forge a commitment order. Yeah, we picked him up an hour ago. He's already talking. The room went silent. Blake turned to me. Dad, I need you to come with us. We'll get a full statement and we'll make sure you're safe. I nodded. Then I met Blake's eyes. There's one more person you need to catch. Blake raised an eyebrow. Who? Trevor Mason, I said. He's the one pulling the strings, and I know exactly how to bring him out. Blake's expression sharpened. Tell me, I smiled grimly. Let's just say, he thinks he's about to collect $4.5 million, and he won't be able to resist showing up to claim it. Trevor Mason thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn otherwise. Lindsay and Cameron sat on the sofa in my living room, handcuffed, silent. Agent Sarah Mitchell stood near the front door. Blake turned to me, his expression sharp and focused. Dad, he said. Who is Trevor Mason and how do we find him? I held up Lindsay's phone, the one I'd quietly taken from the hallway table during the confrontation. Trevor Mason is the real mastermind. He and Lindsay have been planning this for 3 years. Cameron was just the tool. Cameron's head snapped up, his face pale. What? I ignored him and looked at Blake. Lindsay was supposed to text Trevor once I was at Evergreen. He's waiting for that signal right now. Blake's eyes narrowed. Then we'll send it. Lindsay's voice was cold and venomous. I won't help you. I smiled grimly. You don't need to help. I already have your phone, and I know your passcode. I watched you type it in 12 times. Her face went white. Cameron leaned forward, his voice bitter and cracking. I'll help. Let Trevor rot in prison for what he's done. Blake nodded. What do you know? He's staying at the Riverside Hotel, Cameron said. Room 412. He's been there for the past week, waiting for Lindsay's signal. Blake turned to Sarah. Call local PD. Wait, I interrupted. I have a better idea. Blake raised an eyebrow. What? I held up Lindsay's phone. We send him the text he's expecting. We tell him it's done, that I'm at Evergreen, and we invite him here to celebrate. Sarah frowned. That's entrapment. It's an invitation, I said. He's free to decline. Blake hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Do it. I unlocked Lindsay's phone and typed carefully, Done. Dad is at Evergreen. Come to the house. We need to celebrate before I leave for the airport. I hit send. Lindsay stared at me, her face twisted with fury. You have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done, I said quietly. I've stopped you. We waited. Blake positioned Sarah near the front door. He stood in the hallway out of sight. I stayed in the living room watching Lindsay and Cameron. Neither of them spoke. 28 minutes later, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the silence. A sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. The front door opened. Trevor Mason walked in, a bottle of champagne in one hand and a wide, triumphant smile on his face. Lindsay, he called out. We did it. Where's the old man? He stopped mid-stride when he saw me standing in the living room. His smile faltered. Then he saw Lindsay and Cameron handcuffed on the sofa. His eyes widened. What the? Blake stepped out from the hallway, badge raised. Trevor Mason, FBI. You're under arrest. Trevor spun toward the door. Sarah was already there, blocking his path. He lunged left. She tackled him with a swift, practiced motion, slamming him face first onto the hardwood floor. The champagne bottle shattered glass and foam spreading across the entryway. Blake cuffed him, hauled him to his feet, and shoved him into the living room. Trevor's face was red, his breathing ragged. This is insane, Trevor snarled. You can't prove anything. Actually, I said, stepping forward, I can. I held up my tablet and pressed play. The recording was from 3 nights earlier, a phone call between Lindsay and Trevor that I'd captured through the camera hidden in Helen's portrait. Their voices filled the room. Lindsay. What about Cameron, Trevor? Cameron's the fall guy. Once the money's transferred, he's a loose end. Lindsay. What do you mean, Trevor? I mean, accidents happen. Car trouble, health issues, whatever. Clean and simple. Lindsay. You're talking about making him disappear, Trevor. I'm talking about making sure he can't connect us to anything. Do you want to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder? Lindsay, no. Trevor, then trust me. The recording ended. Cameron's face went from pale to ghost white. He turned to Lindsay, his voice shaking. You were going to kill me. Lindsay's mouth opened, but no words came out. Cameron lunged at her with a roar of rage. Blake caught him, shoving him back onto the sofa. Stay down, Trevor laughed, a cold, ugly sound. That recording won't hold up in court. It's inadmissible. What you're about to hear is the darkest secret of all. But first type "finish him" in the comments if you want to see Trevor brought to justice. I need to know you're still with me. Also, a quick note. This next part includes some fictionalized details. If that's not your thing, feel free to stop here. All right, here we go. Blake looked at him calmly. Maybe. But conspiracy to commit murder gives me probable cause to dig deeper into your life. And I'm very good at digging. Sarah glanced at her phone, then looked up sharply. Blake, Trevor Mason has an outstanding warrant out of Nevada, 2019. Elderly fraud, same pattern. Blake's expression hardened. How similar. 72-year-old widow, $4 million. She was committed to a mental health facility. Sarah paused. She died there 6 months later. Everyone in the room turned to stare at Trevor. I stepped closer to him. So you've done this before. Trevor met my eyes, his smile cold and reptilian. Allegations. Never proven. We'll prove this one, Blake said. I turned away from Trevor and looked at Lindsay. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm Dad," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said quietly. "I loved you. I gave you everything. And you sold me out for money. Dad, please. The daughter I loved," I said. "She's dead." Lindsay's face crumpled. Blake and Sarah led all three of them out. Trevor in one police car, Lindsay in another, Cameron in a third. I watched from the doorway as the red and blue lights faded down the street. A soft voice spoke behind me. "Walter, are you all right?" I turned. Catherine Hayes stood at the edge of my driveway, her face lined with concern. "I'm all right now, Catherine," I said. "Thank you." She nodded and squeezed my hand. "If you need anything, I know where to find you." She smiled gently and walked back toward her house. I stood alone in the doorway as dawn broke over the horizon. The house was silent, empty. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But as the police cars disappeared around the corner, I realized something. This still wasn't over. There was still Dr. Russo, still Evergreen Behavioral Center, still a system that preyed on the elderly and vulnerable. Justice had been served today, but there was more justice that needed to be done. With Lindsay, Cameron, and Trevor in custody, Blake turned his attention to the real monster, Evergreen Behavioral Center. 3 days after the arrests, a convoy of black SUVs and unmarked sedans rolled up to the sprawling Evergreen facility on the edge of town. FBI agents in tactical vests stormed through the front doors. Badges held high warrants in hand. I wasn't there. Blake had insisted I stay home and rest, but he called me that evening to fill me in. "Dad," he said, his voice tight. "What we found, it's worse than we thought." I sat in my living room, the phone pressed to my ear. "How bad?" "There are 32 patients currently housed at Evergreen. 28 of them are showing signs of severe overmedication. Sedatives, antipsychotics, hallucinogens, all administered without proper consent or medical justification." He paused. "Financial records show $47 million in patient fees collected over the past 5 years. I felt the blood drain from my face. 47 million. Dr. Russo kept meticulous records," Blake continued. "Names, dollar amounts, kickback percentages. He received 15% of every patient's assets as his cut. The rest was funneled through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts." "How many victims are we talking about?" I asked quietly. "At least 50, Blake said. Some died at Evergreen. Some were released after their money ran out, penniless, broken, with nowhere to go." His voice hardened. "That your case blew the whole thing wide open." I closed my eyes. 50 people. 50 families destroyed just like mine almost was. "Where's Russo now?" I asked. "We picked him up an hour ago." Dr. Gerald Russo sat in an FBI interrogation room. His expensive suit rumpled his face, pale and slick with sweat. Blake and Agent Sarah Mitchell sat across from him, a thick file folder between them. "I want my lawyer," Russo said, his voice tight. Blake leaned back in his chair. "You're going to need a good one. Conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, falsifying medical records, just for starters." "I was simply performing evaluations," Russo said stiffly. "My medical judgment is protected." "Well, you signed commitment orders for over 50 people in 5 years," Blake interrupted. "All of them coincidentally wealthy. That's not medicine, Dr. Russo. That's organized racketeering." Russo's mouth tightened. He said nothing. Sarah slid a document across the table. "This is the evaluation you performed on Walter Reynolds last Friday. You diagnosed him with severe delusions, paranoid psychosis, and auditory hallucinations. Yet your own notes show he answered every cognitive question correctly. Blake leaned forward. You also backdated the paperwork to make it look like you'd been treating him for weeks. That's falsifying federal documents. Russo's lawyer arrived 20 minutes later. By then, the damage was done. The investigation spread like wildfire. Within a week, Richard Crane, the lawyer who had drafted the fraudulent power of attorney documents, was arrested at his downtown office. He tried to claim he was merely following his client's instructions, but the FBI found emails linking him directly to Dr. Russo and Evergreen's financial network. Victor Ashford, the art dealer who had promised to fence my paintings on the black market, was picked up at his gallery. A search warrant uncovered a ledger documenting decades of stolen and fraudulently obtained artwork. He'd been Cameron's contact and Trevor's before that. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. 6 people arrested, 50 victims identified, $47 million stolen. And at the center of it all, Evergreen Behavioral Center, a facade of compassion, hiding a machine designed to strip the elderly of their dignity, their autonomy, and their life savings. Blake asked me to give a full deposition to the FBI. I spent 2 days in a federal building recounting every detail: the cameras, the drugs, the isolation, the forged documents, the recordings I'd captured. I handed over every video file, every audio clip, every scrap of evidence I'd gathered from my attic studio. "This is the most comprehensive victim testimony I've ever seen," Blake told me. "It's going to be the backbone of the prosecution." But I wasn't the only one willing to testify. Robert Klein, the man whose mother Margaret had died at Evergreen, drove 3 hours to meet me at a coffee shop near my house. He was tall, gray-haired, his face lined with grief that had never fully healed. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, gripping my hand firmly, "what you did exposing them, you saved lives." I shook my head. "I wish I could have saved your mother." Robert's eyes glistened. "You got justice for her. That means more than you know." Margaret Lawson, the 71-year-old survivor I'd found during my research, also agreed to testify. I met her at a community center, where she now lived, a frail woman with fierce eyes and a walker. "I'll testify," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Even if I have to do it from a wheelchair. They took everything from me, but they didn't take my voice." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you." The federal case moved swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Russo, Richard Crane, and Victor Ashford were indicted on multiple counts. Trevor Mason's prior Nevada warrant was upgraded to federal charges. Cameron and Lindsay faced conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted kidnapping. Blake kept me updated every step of the way. "The U.S. Attorney is pushing for maximum sentences," he told me. "They want to send a message that elder abuse won't be tolerated." I nodded. "Good." Evergreen Behavioral Center was shut down. The facility was seized by federal authorities, and the remaining patients were transferred to legitimate care facilities. A victims fund was established to try to recover some of the stolen assets, though I knew most of the money was gone forever. But the truth was out. The system that had preyed on the vulnerable had been dismantled, and the people responsible were going to pay. 3 months later, I stood outside the federal courthouse in a crisp autumn morning, the air cool and sharp. Blake walked beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "You ready for this?" he asked. I looked up at the imposing granite building, the American flag snapping in the wind above it. "Yes," I said. "It's time." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Robert Klein sat in the front row. Margaret Lawson was there in her wheelchair, flanked by her lawyer. Reporters lined the back wall, notebooks in hand. And at the defense table, flanked by federal marshals, sat Lindsay Cameron, Trevor, Dr. Russo, Richard Crane, and Victor Ashford. Today was sentencing day. It was time to face Lindsay one last time. Federal courtroom. Judge Patricia Coleman presiding. The moment I both dreaded and longed for. The courtroom was packed. I sat in the front row beside Blake, his hand resting on my shoulder. Catherine Hayes sat to my left, her face calm and composed. Behind us, Robert Klein, Margaret Lawson in her wheelchair, and dozens of other victims and their families, people whose lives had been shattered by the conspiracy we'd exposed. At the defense table sat all 6 defendants: Lindsay Cameron, Trevor Mason, Dr. Gerald Russo, Richard Crane, and Victor Ashford. Each had pled guilty. The evidence had been too overwhelming to fight. Today was sentencing. Judge Coleman, a stern woman in her early 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, surveyed the courtroom. We will now hear victim impact statements. Margaret Lawson was first. A bailiff wheeled her to the front of the room. Her voice was thin but steady. My name is Margaret Lawson. I'm 71 years old. 4 months at Evergreen Behavioral Center cost me $1.8 million, my home and my dignity. Her hands trembled on the armrests of her wheelchair. I still have nightmares. I wake up thinking I'm back there drugged and helpless. These people are predators. They deserve no mercy. She was wheeled back. The courtroom was silent. Robert Klein stood next. His voice was thick with grief. My mother died at Evergreen. She died confused, broken, thinking she'd lost her mind. But her mind wasn't lost. It was stolen. He looked directly at Dr. Russo. Mr. Reynolds fought back. My mother couldn't. So I'm asking this court to remember her, and all the others who didn't survive. Catherine Hayes spoke third. She stood tall, her voice clear. I watched my sister die in a facility just like Evergreen. Elder abuse happens in darkness, behind locked doors, in places we're told are for their own good. She paused. But abuse is not a private family matter. It's a crime, and it must be punished. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady. I walked to the podium and looked directly at Lindsay. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Your Honor, I began. My name is Walter Reynolds. I'm 67 years old, not ancient, not senile, not incompetent. Just 67. I took a breath. I spent 42 years restoring damaged paintings. I thought I could fix anything, repair what was broken, bring beauty back from ruin. But I've learned something: you can't restore someone who doesn't want to be saved. I looked at Lindsay again. She was staring at the table, her face pale. My daughter orchestrated a conspiracy to poison me, manipulate my mind, steal my life savings, and imprison me in a mental health facility. She used my love as a weapon. She drugged me. She isolated me. She forged documents to have me declared insane. My voice hardened. But this case isn't just about me. It's about Margaret. It's about Robert's mother. It's about 50 other victims whose names we'll never forget. It's about a system that preys on the elderly, that treats us as easy targets, as inconveniences, as wallets to be emptied. I straightened. I'm here to say we are not easy prey. We are strong. We are capable. And we will fight back. I looked at Judge Coleman. I ask this court to send a message: elder abuse will not be tolerated. Not in families, not in institutions, not anywhere. I returned to my seat. Blake squeezed my hand. Judge Coleman leaned forward, her expression grave. I have presided over many cases in my career. Few have disgusted me as much as this one. Her voice was cold and sharp. The systematic exploitation of elderly citizens, the corruption of medical and legal professionals, the betrayal of family trust. This case represents everything that is wrong with unchecked greed. She opened a file. Dr. Gerald Russo, you violated your oath as a physician. You turned your practice into a criminal enterprise. I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison and permanent revocation of your medical license. Russo's face went white. Richard Crane, you used your legal expertise to forge documents and facilitate fraud. 12 years in federal prison. You are hereby disbarred. Crane looked down. Victor Ashford, 10 years for conspiracy and trafficking stolen property. Cameron Drake, you participated in a plot to drug, isolate, and defraud your own father-in-law. 15 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Cameron closed his eyes. Trevor Mason, you have a history of preying on the vulnerable. You conspired to defraud Mr. Reynolds and plotted to murder Cameron Drake. 22 years in federal prison. Trevor's jaw tightened. Judge Coleman paused. Then she looked at Lindsay. Lindsay Reynolds. You were the architect of this conspiracy. You betrayed your own father, the man who raised you, loved you, trusted you. You showed no remorse. You weaponized his grief over your late mother. You planned to have him drugged, imprisoned, and stripped of everything he had worked for his entire life. Lindsay's shoulders shook. I sentence you to 24 years in federal prison. Lindsay's head snapped up. No, no, please! Additionally, Judge Coleman continued, all assets connected to this conspiracy are hereby seized and will be liquidated to provide restitution to the victims. Evergreen Behavioral Center is permanently closed. Its assets will be sold and distributed accordingly. The gavel fell. Lindsay turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Dad, I'm sorry. Please. I looked away. The marshals stepped forward, cuffing each defendant. One by one, they were led out of the courtroom. Lindsay was last. She stopped at the door, looking back over her shoulder. Dad, please, say something. I met her eyes for one final moment. I have nothing left to say to you. Her face crumpled. The marshal guided her through the door, and she was gone. Blake's arm wrapped around my shoulders. Let's go home, Dad. I nodded. Outside the courthouse, the autumn sun was warm on my face. Robert Klein shook my hand. Margaret Lawson squeezed my arm. Catherine walked beside me to Blake's car. Justice had been served. The predators had been caged. The victims had been heard. It was over. But as I climbed into the passenger seat and watched the courthouse fade in the rearview mirror, I realized something. My life, the one I'd fought so hard to protect, had to begin again. The house on Hillcrest held too many ghosts. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The police had removed Lindsay and Cameron's belongings months ago. The furniture was gone. Only the echoes remained: Helen's laughter in the kitchen, Lindsay's childhood footsteps on the stairs, the weight of betrayal pressing against every wall. I couldn't heal here. A young family bought the house, a husband, wife, and 2 small children. The wife stood in the living room, her face bright with plans. This house has such character, she said. I smiled. It was my wife's dream home. Take care of it. Before I left, I took down Helen's portrait. I carefully removed the tiny camera hidden behind her left eye, the camera that had captured everything that had saved my life. I didn't need it anymore, but I kept the painting. Blake helped me move into a smaller 2-bedroom apartment near his family. 1 bedroom became my new studio, brighter, more open, flooded with natural light. Helen's portrait hung in the living room, her steady gaze watching over me. Robert Klein visited a month later. He sat across from me in my small kitchen, his face lighter than I'd ever seen it. Because of you, my mother's money is being returned, he said. Not all of it, but enough. What will you do? I asked. Start a foundation in her name to help other victims of elder abuse. He leaned forward. Would you join the board? I felt something warm expand in my chest. I'd be honored. Margaret Lawson sent me a card shortly after. You gave me back my life. I'm 71, not done yet. Time to live again. Evergreen Behavioral Center was demolished. The 28 patients still housed there were transferred to legitimate facilities. Many of them, freed from the toxic drugs, regained their mental clarity within weeks. The property was sold, and the proceeds went into a victim restitution fund. I found new purpose. I began volunteering at the community center, teaching art restoration to seniors. I offered free restoration work to low-income families and abuse survivors. I became an advocate, a guest speaker at town halls and senior centers. "You're never too old to fight back," I told audiences, and I meant it. I spent more time with Blake's children. My granddaughter Emma, 9 years old, sat beside me in my studio one afternoon, watching me work on a damaged landscape. "Grandpa, why do you fix old paintings?" she asked. I set down my brush and looked at her. "Because broken things can become beautiful again. If you're patient. If you truly care." She nodded solemnly. "Like people?" "Yes," I said softly. "Like people." 1 year after the trial, December 2025, a postcard arrived. I was in my studio when Blake dropped off the mail. The postcard was plain institutional. The return address read, Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. From Lindsay. I stared at it for a long time before I read it. "Dad, I know you probably won't read this, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was greedy, selfish, and cruel. Prison gives me a lot of time to think about what I destroyed. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I remember everything you taught me. About second chances. About restoring broken things. I'm trying to fix myself. It might take 24 years. It might take a lifetime. But I'm trying. I love you. I always loved you. I just forgot how to show it." Lindsay. I read it 3 times. Part of me wanted to throw it away. Burn it. Forget she had ever existed. But another part, the part that had raised her, painted with her, loved her, felt something. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. But acknowledgement. She was trying. Maybe that was enough for now. I didn't reply. But I kept the postcard. I placed it in a small wooden box, along with a few childhood photos of Lindsay and some old drawings she'd made as a girl. I'm not ready to forgive, I thought. But I'm also not ready to completely let go. Someday, maybe. Or maybe not. And that's okay. I thought about the past year. I had testified in 3 other elder abuse cases. The foundation Robert and I started had helped 15 families. Margaret and I met for coffee every week. I had restored 23 paintings this year, all for people who couldn't afford to pay. My relationship with Blake was stronger than ever. My grandchildren loved me. I had purpose again. Blake arrived that evening with Emma and her younger brother. Grandpa, Emma called running into the studio. "I wrote an essay about you at school." I smiled. "About me." "What did you write?" "About how brave you are." "My teacher said courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid, but doing the right thing anyway." Tears stung my eyes. "Your teacher is very wise." Blake rested a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Dad?" I nodded. "I'm more than okay. For the first time in 2 years, I'm truly happy." Later that night, after Blake and the children left, I stood alone in my studio. Sunlight poured through the window. Helen's portrait gazed down at me, serene and watchful. I picked up my brush and whispered, "We made it through, my love. We're home." I turned back to the easel and continued painting. I'm 68 years old now. Not ancient, not elderly, not an old man, just 68. And I've learned broken things can heal. Damaged art can be restored. Trust can be rebuilt, maybe not with the old people, but with new ones. Time moves on, so do I. If you've stayed with me until now, I want to leave you with this. My family story taught me that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Sometimes the people closest to you can become strangers. But that doesn't mean you stop fighting. It doesn't mean you give up. I'm 68 years old. I survived because I refused to be a victim. But I also learned something harder. Dad, revenge isn't about anger, it's about justice. It's about standing up when the world expects you to sit down. My dad, revenge wasn't bitter. It was necessary. It was protecting not just myself, but 50 other families who couldn't fight back. Looking back on this family story, I see now I should have asked for help sooner. I should have trusted Blake earlier. I should have spoken up the moment I felt something was wrong. Don't be like me. Don't wait until you're cornered. Don't let pride or shame keep you silent. God gave me the strength to survive when I thought I had none left. He put Catherine, Robert, Margaret, and Blake in my path when I needed them most. I believe broken things can heal, not because they're perfect again, but because they're still standing. To anyone listening who feels trapped, forgotten, or invisible, you are not too old, too weak, or too broken to fight back. Your voice matters. Your life matters. This family story, My Dad Revenge, isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who has ever been underestimated. If this moved you, please share it. Leave a comment about your own experience or someone you know. Subscribe so more people can hear these stories. Together we can shine light into the darkness. Thank you for walking this journey with me to the very end. Disclaimer: this narrative contains fictionalized elements created for educational and awareness purposes. If this content isn't suitable for you, please feel free to explore other stories that better fit your preferences.